And that's what we'll be talking about this morning is a good way to wrap up or to begin this year as we're talking about I was blind, but now I see out of John chapter 9. And the story begins really with one man's problem. It's a rather debilitating problem. It's a rough condition he has. He's a blind man. And after he's healed, though, he realizes that he might have been the only person who now can actually see correctly. As we're going to look and see 4 different groups of people this morning who all suffer with their own set of blindness throughout this story. But this story does not actually begin in John chapter 9. It almost never does begin where it needs to. It actually picks up in John chapter 8. And that's where the setting begins, and that's where we'll start. As Jesus is in the temple talking to the Pharisees and the Jews and having different discussions, and the topics seem to keep coming back to his divinity and who Jesus really is. And by the end of this, these discussions have not gone well. So let's pick up in John chapter 8 and verse 57. So the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" And Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am." Therefore they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. That's a pretty harsh reaction to that statement there. But if you remember what that statement, "I am," means, you quickly understand why they acted the way they did. Remember, it comes from the time when Moses was talking to the burning bush, the voice in the bush. And after all the instructions have been given to him, he says, "Who should I tell them sent me?" And the voice says, "Tell them I am has sent you." It's the name God has chosen to represent himself to his people. I am. That's what he's saying right there. He's saying, I am God. And as it is, the religious leaders do not appreciate that one bit. And they pick up stones to end his life. And, of course, rightfully so, they're acting correctly based on what the old law says. We look at what Leviticus 24:16, the beginning of that verse says. It says, "Moreover, the one who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All of the congregation shall certainly stone him." They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do if this was somebody who was blaspheming the name of God. But that is obviously not the case, as these people are blinded by the fact that they cannot and will not see who Jesus truly is. So, Jesus decides it's best to leave the temple for the time being. And while he's on his way out, he stops at the gate because he sees there's a man sitting there, a blind man who's begging, hoping to feed off of the generosity of people coming to worship that day. And he stops, even though his life is at risk, because he sees there's a teachable moment for everybody here this day. And it's a teachable moment for us today. And we pick up in the story with the first group of people that have a blind condition. They are his disciples who are blinded by a judgmental attitude. Pick up in chapter 9, verse 2. "And the disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind?'" Isn't that a strange question that they ask? Who sinned, the man or his parents? Well, it was a common belief at this time that if you have a physical deformity or ailment, it was because there was some great sin in your life or something had happened in your life to cause this sin. And you get this kind of where they're coming from, at least, understanding based on things that have happened in the Old Testament. We see the Lord has struck people with leprosy in the past, made them lame, blindness, and even death. The Lord had interacted with them at this time, but of course we haven't seen any interaction from the Lord and direct interaction for 400 years. So it's a little strange that they're still asking these kind of questions, but maybe it's even more strange is that we're still asking these kind of questions today, as some doctrines today teach a very similar idea to this. We call it the health and wealth doctrine. That is, if you are healthy and doing well with your family, you must be doing good things. You must be a righteous person. God is looking favorably upon you, and vice versa. If you're poor or if you're sick, you've done something bad in your life that the Lord is saying, okay, push it aside and let the bad things come. And with your wealth as well, financially, If you are a poor person, you must be doing something wrong, that the Lord is not blessing you with great riches and bounty. And if you're a wealthy person, again, I'm a righteous person. I'm doing good things. The Lord's looking out for me. And I'm going to say that if that was really the case, I think everybody in this audience would probably be multimillionaires or billionaires at this point. And I don't think I know any billionaires in this audience. It's just not how the Lord operates. It's not a reward system for doing the things He says. Because we do have one reward, though, and it's waiting for us at the very end. But what the disciples are asking here is simply this: was it the infant's sin in the womb, or was it the parent's sin upon conception that caused this blindness? What a strange and absurd statement and question. How is it that an infant could sin in the womb? How is it they could do something like that without having any interaction? Or how is it that the parent's sin could become the child's? Aren't we told that we're to represent ourselves, that we each will answer for our own actions? Justice is given to the individual based on what you've done in your life. How is it the parent's sin could affect him in this? It's just a very strange and weird question to ask. And Jesus quickly corrects them in their statement of what they say here in verse 3. He said, "It was neither that this man sinned, nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him." The disciples see this blind man. All they can see is someone who needs to be analyzed and talked about and have questions asked. But Jesus sees something else. He sees a man who can be displaying glory for God that day. He sees a great chance to teach some lessons. But too often in our lives, I think we might have some of these kind of disciple-esque attitudes or questions. Maybe when you're in the grocery store and you see somebody who's got a special box to talk out of because there's a hole in their throat to breathe. You might think, why would they have done that to themselves? Why would they have taken it that far in their life? Or you're walking down the sidewalk and you see someone covered almost from head to toe in ink. Maybe your first thought is, I might want to cross to the other side of the road before I continue on. That man seems to be rather intimidating in his presence. We ask ourselves, why would they do this to themselves? What must be going on in their lives to cause them to do that? And that's not the right question we need to be asking. We need to be asking, how can I help them in this? Because you know what? Maybe what they're doing, it's a cry out for attention. It's a call for help. They have some void in their life they're trying to fill with other things. And as we've been told throughout so many times, you're never going to fill that void by yourself. That you need something or someone better. They're crying out for help. Maybe we need to make sure and go and try to fill that void and talk to them and help them through these issues. And maybe they're looking for something greater that we can help provide. And that's what Jesus really says here in verses 4 and 5. I'm going to get back up to 3 so we get the whole context. He says, "It was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day, for night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Listen to verse 5 again. "While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." What a powerful statement. In fact, if you've yet to pick a New Year's resolution or motto for the year, I strongly encourage you to pick that one. For when I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. When I'm in the world, I can go out and I can help some people. I can shine my light and make their lives better in some way. For I am the light of the world. Well, pick up again in verse 6. After he makes this statement, he heals the man. He said, when he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied the clay to his eyes and said to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. This is where the story should have ended, right there in verse 7. Chapter 9 should have ended right there, at this high point a point of joy and just excitement for this man because he now can see color. He can see shapes. He can see and interact with people. He doesn't have to be carried around and guided by all people in his life. He's now independent. What a joyful day this must have been for this man. Have you seen the Facebook videos of little children who finally get hearing aids and they can hear their mother say, "I love you," for the first time, and the emotional reaction that comes from that? Or people who've been colorblind their whole life and they're given special glasses, they can now see the shades of red and green and blue that we maybe take for granted every day. The emotional reactions that come from them. I can only assume what this man is going through. But unfortunately, we have more verses to read because the rest of the world did not share in his joy. In fact, his neighbors quickly sucked all the warm air out of his balloon there. As his neighbors, the crowds, are blinded by cynicism and skepticism, this could not have really happened. Let's pick up in verse 8. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously saw him as a beggar were saying, "Is not this one who used to sit and beg?" And others were saying, "Yeah, this is he." But others were saying, "No, but he is like him." And the man kept saying, "I am the one." So they were saying to him, "How then were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man who is called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went away and washed, and I received sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And the man said, "I do not know." Well, his neighbors are coming in and "Are you really this man? Are you really him?" "Well, yeah, I'm him." So the real question they're asking here is, have you been tricking us for what, at least 25 years, as we find out later this man is of age, 25 years old. He's at least 25, so they're saying, have you been tricking everybody for 25 years just to steal from us? So instead of sharing in this man's joy and excitement, his neighbors, the ones who should have loved him, they're coming in, and now this man has to act defensively. He's being accused as a liar. Talk about having all the joy taken away from you in this. That they come in and they're saying they can't see the mighty hand of God in this situation. How many times has this maybe happened to us, where false teachers or people who are seeking fame, glory, and wealth in the Lord's name have maybe desensitized us a little bit to the glory that God can provide us, either by seeing Him act in physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual ways. I'll use myself for an example with this. A few years ago, I got into a kind of a phase of watching edited videos of a pretty popular televangelist by the name of Benny Hinn. So you might know exactly where I'm going with this. He's known as a man who provides miracles of healing, and they can be rather amusing to watch if you do not believe in his powers that he's doing. For example, he'll be sitting there talking, and all of a sudden he'll lift his hands up and using some sort of power, push out towards the crowd, and you'll see wave and rows after rows of people just falling backwards. Or he'll have people brought up on stage, and he'll take his jacket off and use it kind of like a whip and swipe at them with his jacket, and then they will also fall backwards, either laying still or start spasming. Or again, he'll take his hands and push out at people, and the same thing will happen. I like to watch them because people put pretty funny edits to them and songs or maybe Star Wars references with different things. It was quite amusing to watch. But in the end, it really desensitized me a little bit to the wonders that God can provide with this. Because He's making light and of trying to steal away the power of God there, and that was stealing away the joy that could really come because of God's magnificent hand there. We need to make sure we're weary of Satan and his servants, for the tricks that they're trying to use are all there to try to harden us up a little bit towards what our Father's really trying to do here, is show that He loves us and He wants to answer our prayers. He wants to guide us. Watch out for becoming a little desensitized in our lives. Well, as the story continues on, the crowds just cannot figure out what's happening. So they think, we need to take this man to someone or some people who could really get the right answer out of him. They'll come down to to the core of what's going on. So they take him to the Pharisees, the third group of men who are blinded, and they're blinded by traditions or traditionalism. Verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. Now it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Make the note there. It's the Sabbath day. Then the Pharisees were asking him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, "He applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and now I see." Therefore some of the Pharisees were saying, "This man, Jesus, is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others were saying, "How can a man who's a sinner perform such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him, since he opened your eyes?" And he said, "He's a prophet." Well, the Pharisees can see the results of this amazing miracle and what truly is the greatest example of grace and compassion right in front of them. But instead of seeing that, all they can see now is, we might have a case now against Jesus because he's a man who's breaking the Sabbath traditions. Remember, the Pharisees, their very being is defined by their fervent hold to the Mosaic laws and traditions, and that's what they've done with the Sabbath here. What was the point of the Sabbath? It was a day of rest, a day of physical rest for the people. They put aside their physical work, and it was a day for them to spiritually reflect upon God and to try to create and work on their relationship with their Lord through prayer, sacrifice, time spent in the temple together, worshiping. But the Pharisees had kind of taken it a few steps forward, and in fact, if you go to somebody who worships or honors the Sabbath nowadays, it's gotten to the point where you can't even flip on a light switch in your house because that is considered work. Talk about expanding upon what the Lord has given to maybe a little nth degree. Or maybe is another good example. Maybe think about the Broadway musical Fiddler on the Roof. And what is the first song that they sing? What does it begin with? Tradition. The point of this song is that the tradition, how foundational the traditions are to their Jewish community. And Tevye, who's the milkman, the main character, has 5 daughters. And his traditional world is really shaken up when the eldest 3 decide to break the marriage traditional laws and things that happen here. And by the end of that musical, his entire world is shaken apart and is torn apart because he can't let go of these traditions. That's where the Pharisees are at in all of this, that they can't let go of these traditions. You know what? It's possible to become blind to what God is doing now in our lives because we can't let go of the past. Mr. Ricky and I have been studying institutionalism and the churches, the past church history from the 20th century, the churches in the 40s and 50s and 60s, all the things that went on during that time. And you can see stories that come out of what have happened since then, of churches that have had numbers into the thousands, have dwindled down to the hundreds, and yet the stories that come out of there is that they can't let go of the past, that they can't get past their past. But you know what? I don't want to miss what God is doing now for us in our lives because I'm so focused on how we used to do things. Brother, we need to make sure that we're doing things because that's the way God wants it to be done, not just because it's the way we've always done things. Simply put, God's work, God's way. Make sure we're doing things God's work in God's way. Well, the Pharisees here, they are determined to deny what is an undeniable miracle in front of them. So, to prove this man must be lying, or to make sure that he's not lying, they call in his parents for questioning. Let's pick up in verse 18. The Jews did not believe it of him, that they had been blind, so they received sight until they called the parents of the very one who received his sight and questioned him, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? Then how does he now see?" And his parents answered them and said, "We know this is our son, and that he was born blind, but how he now sees we do not know. or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him. He is of age, and he will speak for himself." And his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be Christ, he is to be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, "He is of age." Well, we see the blindness of his parents here as they are blinded by fear. And these parents had a good reason to be afraid. Remember what has happened before all of this. Jesus has had a very public confrontation with the Jews and the Pharisees to the point where they wanted to stone him. And remember what day this all occurred on. The Sabbath day. He's in the temple. Everybody would be here to be praying, to be worshiping, to come together and take time together. The news of what has happened is probably quickly spread throughout the community, and the parents know what's happening, and they know this one important thing. They don't want to get in the middle of a fight between Jesus and the Pharisees, because what happens when you get in the middle there? The Pharisees are going to roll you right over, unless you're on their side. And if they spoke up for Jesus, they know they would be excommunicated or not allowed to worship with their brethren. And this was a big deal in the Jewish world this time. If you weren't allowed to be in the synagogue or in the temples, it was impossible to live. You could not work in the marketplace. You could not spend time with your family. You pretty much became an exiled and an outcast of the world. And they were afraid of this. So what do? They point to their son and, in a manner of speaking, throw him under the bus, saying, "He is of age, ask him." We know this is our son. We know he was blind. Other than that, take him. Let him answer for himself and stand up for himself. He's a man. Let him do his thing. How many times have we felt like we've been blinded by fear? Let's say right now, it is a very difficult time to be an outspoken Christian, especially one who holds to biblical morals and values. Just think about what's been going on in the news lately. Great example of this, how the media has been idolizing and put up on a pillar an 11-year-old boy who thinks cross-dressing is the way to go, and the other atrocities that have come with that story. I don't want to get into it. It's just awful. And when you get online and start seeing the comments that people will make about this, you get one of two camps. Either people that are right alongside the media saying, "Yes, good for him for standing up and being who he wants to be." And then you see the immediate tear down of people who come in and say, what are they doing? How can his parents let them do this? How can they be supporting this? And all those people that are on his side are coming in and saying, "Well, you're just old mindseted. You're not caught up to the modern ways. Get caught up because this is how things are going to be now," is not an easy time to be a Christian. But we're called to be lights, to let our light shine, and to be lights in the world. And you know what? We might suffer a little bit in all of that. Turn over to 1 Peter 3. A couple verses I want to look at there about suffering and about letting our light shine, because this should help encourage us to let our light shine. 1 Peter 3 and verse 14. 1 Peter 3 and verse 14. "But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled." If we're going to suffer for the sake of righteousness, if we're going to make a stand, we are blessed. And don't be feared. Don't worry about what these other people are going to do, because what they can do to you is really only temporary. It's not going to matter in the long run. And what's the blessing? We've got a place waiting for us with our Father up in heaven. So don't worry about what happens here on earth. You do what you know you're supposed to do. Look at verse 17 in chapter 3. "For it is better if God should will it, so that you suffer for doing what is right, rather than for doing what is wrong." It's better to suffer for right than for going along with the crowds, being intimidated by them, not wanting to stand. It's better to do right than to stand for wrong. If we're suffering, we must be doing something right. And now I'm not saying go out and find ways to suffer. What I'm saying is, if you are going to suffer, it's a good thing. And don't worry, because our Lord has got our back. Well, now we get to the really fun part of the story. Because ironically, the blind man now realizes all of what's happened, that he's the only one who truly has received sight. And there's no way I can improve upon what John has written here, so let's just read what he says here in the story. So we're going to read verses 24 down to 34. So a second time they called the man who has been blind and said to him, "Give glory to God, for we know that this man is a sinner." And then he answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. The one thing I do know is, though I was blind, now I see." So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become his disciples too, do you?" And they reviled him and said, You are his disciple, but we are the disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but for this man we do not know where he is from." And the man answered and said to them, "Well, here is an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears them. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." And they answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you're teaching us?" So they put him out. Well, this is exactly what his parents feared, except for themselves, that he'd be put out. But the blind man here, or now the ex-blind man, doesn't seem to be quite put off at what's happened. In fact, he's made a great and powerful stand against the leaders here who are proclaiming him to be a liar, proclaiming Jesus to be a man of sin. He knows otherwise, because he now knows exactly who and what Jesus is all about. This isn't where the story ends, though. Then Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" I'll stop real quick and look at what happened just right there. Jesus heard that they had put him out, and after finding him, how cool would that be? That if Jesus heard, "I stood up for truth today in the midst of angry men," he comes to find me and says, "Good job. Thank you for standing up for me." That's what he does right there. That needs to be exactly what we do in our lives every day. Treat it as so if I'm doing something to make a stand, what would Jesus say if he came to find me? Would he come and say, "Good job"? Or would he come and shake his head and just walk past, denying the one who also denied him? So he heard that he put him out, and finding him said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the man answered, "Who is he, Lord, that I might believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking to you." And he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I came in this world, so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." And those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, 'We see,' your sin still remains." Jesus not only opened the man's eyes physically, but he's opened them spiritually as well, giving him that wonderful gift to be able to see Jesus in all of his glory for who he really is. Jesus this day saw a heart that wanted grace, compassion, and salvation. Wouldn't it be so great if we all could have that same ability to go in and see everyone's hearts, know their intent or their actions? Unfortunately, that's not what we have. We have to go and discover what people's hearts are about. The Pharisees were trying to figure that question out too there. They're trying to discover who they are and what they're about. And Jesus says, you're still blind. You're still struggling to move out in life. Which leads us back to this great question, am I a blind man and now have been healed, or am I still wandering in darkness? Well, you might have heard this statement before. There is none so blind as he who will not see. In this story today, we've seen a big pile of willful blindness. So many people who just refused to see what was really happening before them. From the disciples, to the crowds, to the Pharisees, to the parents of the blind men. People who just could not and did not want to see what was really happening. Every one of them blind in some way. Well, there's a story about a little boy who comes from Bible class, and he's got a big old frown on his face. Someone approaches him and says, "Why are you frowning?" He says, "Because the teacher made us close our eyes today for a really long time, and I didn't like that." And after looking at what the little boy's holding in his hand, the worksheet that he had with him, he sees that they studied what we're talking about this morning, about the blind man being healed. And then he explains to the little boy that the teacher just wanted you to understand what it's like to be blind, so that when you did get to open your eyes, you could have a small sliver of that experience of joy he received and be able to see. But the little boy wasn't that impressed. He says, "I don't like to be blind." There are a lot of people today who seem to like being blind. They walk around with their eyes so tightly shut against seeing what the Lord has done for them and is doing for them every single day for them, their loved ones, and so many people in the world. The final question is, will we let Jesus open our spiritual eyes, remove the blindness, so we can see the truth and see the love he has for us every single day? Will we see? Blind, but now to see. We'll now have a closing prayer and then a song to follow.